Welcome, thank you. I probably don't even need this. I'm used to being quite loud, so I'll use it, but if anybody else wants to take over with this one, I'm happy to share it. And it's my pleasure to be here. I don't really feel like I've put this panel together. I feel like this panel's brought themselves together, some pretty amazing and powerful speakers that you're about to hear, and we want to engage in discussion with you. So I think you might know a little bit about some of us. I'm Sue Hutton, so I'm a social worker. I've been working in developmental services for around 25 years. And in my very early days as a social worker, I had a lot of people that I was providing services for who happened to be institutionalized. And I started realizing this, wow, right, you were in the institution, you were in a lot of them. So on Friday evenings, I was visiting one person in their home in the community who wanted to see other people. So he asked if I would invite other people over. So we would all gather at this one guy's house every Friday. And then I realized in the discussions that all of them had survived the institutional abuses that we've heard about. And they would, in these hushed voices, start talking about things that they all knew about in their years at Huronia, one of the large institutions. Is everybody familiar with Huronia? We'll talk a little bit more about the class action lawsuit that's gone through. But the stories that they shared just left me breathless. This is 25 years ago that I learned about this, where they all knew about a murder that had happened in the institution that they were all surviving in. And none of them had spoken about it before. They all knew that there was a woman who had been taken down to the lake. It's a well-known story for people who survived Huronia. And I realized, wow, I really want to be an ally. I love these people. I love hanging out and talking. And so more and more I did. Anyway, here I am all these years later, still working. So I do work at Community Living Toronto. I also am very lucky to work at Arch Disability Law Center on secondment. You're going to get to know Rob Lattanzio at the other end, who's the executive director of Arch Disability Law Center. We also have Diane Wintermute, who is sitting among you, and another amazing lawyer at Arch. Did that film inspire, make you angry, make you upset? Do people have emotional responses to that? I certainly did. And all of our panelists, we're going to talk about what kind of reactions that we've had. A few different things. The movie talks about all of these movements that have happened around the world. In Canada, we're still in the midst. We've come a long way. I referred a little bit to Huronia, the institution I told you about. Kathleen Wynne in 2013 issued this large formal apology that we all kind of wondered, what did that really do? Because we know that we need to go a whole lot further. We're going to talk about that today. And if you had a lot of emotional reactions, hopefully that is something that we can harness, because we need to push further and do more for inclusion, for all of us to be allies, because like the film said, we're all in this together. So I think I'm going to get right into jumping in, and if we could move slides, if we could go to our next slide. Peter Park, who I've worked a lot with, is always pushing me around different ways of accessibility. Accessibility means so many different things. And Peter really guides me and reminds me, you know what, people need pictures and images too. So we do have images, that's why we brought a PowerPoint along. So once we figure out how to get the slide moving, you'll see the next one that's going to come up in a moment. Thank you. Can we, do we have the ability to do this? And if not, we'll just wing it. So if we could go to the next thing. Can we go to, it's coming, next slide's coming. Great. Anyway, we can move along in the name of time and wing it. And like Julia said, we will have a discussion with you later that we really look forward to hearing from you. So our panel today, rather than me introducing, people are going to introduce themselves. So,
hi, I'm Mika, and I'm a university student and an activist.
Hi, my name's Marissa. I grew up in the foster care system. As a disability, growing up in the foster care system, I had no advice, but I'm making up for it now.
Hi, I'm Peter Parks. I've been around for a few years, like 40 of them, doing nothing but advocacy. I've existed in an institution. I'll tell you about it later. I'm also known, because I've been around for so many years, I'm also known as the godfather of the People First movement. Co-founded Respecting Rights and People First.
And hello everyone, that is loud. My name is Robert and I am the Executive Director at Arch Disability Law Center.
And Peter also just mentioned, sorry for the feedback, because it really hurt. I know, right? Me too. Sorry about that.
One mic on at a time, it might help.
Right, so maybe we should turn some of these off.
Yeah.
Turn the mic off. And the mic up.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a very good idea. So we just hitting the
Are you?
mute for not talking. Thank you. Peter just referred to respecting rights. We'll tell you a little bit more about that. But respecting rights is, I don't want to say organization, but it's a group that does rights advocacy and education work around the human rights of people labeled with intellectual disabilities across Ontario. Peter's been very involved with that, as Robert Lattanzio has also, and I also do work with that amazing organization, which we can tell you a bit about. We also have flyers that are out in the foyer, so we'll make sure that people get them. But thank you. So that is all of us. So there we are. Yay, we've got the screen going. Fantastic. So there's all of our amazing panel. And we can go to the next slide, if we could, please. Thank you. So Mika. Mika's going to kick off our panel, talking a little bit. So, Mika, all of us, and we've been meeting, we've been having, I think, a pretty good time meeting, having these difficult discussions. It's not fun stuff that we're talking about, but we've been meeting over food. And I tell you, finding an accessible restaurant close to this venue was very challenging for us. But we did succeed finally. The Museum Tavern was the one that we found. As we were preparing for this, we've been talking about what our gut reactions were. So Mika, do you want to talk about what was your gut reaction when you first watched it? Our panel, by the way, is all going to talk about their experience, so how they felt about the film, and in a way that it touches their personal lives. So also want to prepare you, another one of our panelists said, let people know that some of the discussion that we'll have might be difficult. So bear with us. Sometimes when we have discussions like this, we make sure people are okay, because sometimes it's kind of emotional talking about these not easy things. But Mika, so watching the film, how did you feel?
So my gut reaction was definitely one of anger and frustration. I think especially for me with the example of Jerry's kids and also the Australian example that we saw, that there was just this example of such a clear hierarchy and this godlike sort of control that the able-bodied people had over the funding and the lives of people with disabilities. And one of the things that frustrated me most was just how clearly the control was the people with disabilities had very little control, and this sort of godlike perspective was mainly contributed to people not having any say, even though people with disabilities are absolutely the ones who should be directing funding, and it was the sort of the very wealthy who managed to make themselves feel very nice about participating in these events,
Right.
but it was incredibly problematic.
And I love, Mika, that you're talking about, like, wait a minute, who's making the decisions on where all this funding is going? And it kind of alludes to another statement that we heard in the film that we say so often, nothing about us without us, right? And Mika, you also shared with us stories about your own life. So when you were a kid, starting pretty young, you started witnessing, and I love the term you used, the godlike decision, the godlike control of those around you who are denying you your ability to make your own decisions. So do you want to talk about that story in school?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my very first sort of experience with the control that was taken from me happened when I was very young. I was in second grade. I was 7 years old, and there was this event called the Terry Fox Run. It's pretty common in Canadian schools. And the idea of it is that people are supposed to go out, leave their classrooms, and walk around the block or walk around the school track and fundraise for this person in memory of Terry Fox. And I was taken out of class along with several other kids with disabilities, and we were all expecting to be a part of the run or walk. And instead, we were corralled into the kindergarten area of the school, and we were locked in there. And I asked a teacher, I said, okay, why are we here, and when are we going to be joining the rest of the school? Because I want to participate in the walk. And they said, no, you don't get to say anything about that. You're lucky that you're even allowed here. It's too much of a risk to have any of you out here, and we don't want you to be leaving. So not only was I not allowed, but I was completely shut down starting at that young age.
So you'd learned really early, hang on, I need to really get loud if I want anything to happen because these people aren't listening to me. And it's amazing that you're on this panel because, like Mika said, Mika's a university student, and I think just wait, you're going to hear a lot about Mika in coming years. I think she has a lot to say. So glad that you're joining us. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great. So Mika, and you can ask questions again later on. Please feel free. So yeah, next, so Marissa, our next panelist. So Marissa, what was your kind of gut reaction after you first watched the film? Do you want to talk about how you felt?
Yep, absolutely. So when I watched the film, I was in tears. As a woman with a disability, I rely on working with so many different support workers. Each support worker has a different personality that I have to work with them to help me carry out my day-to-day activities of daily living. This includes very personal matters. Just think for a second what it would be like not to have a choice of who would be walking into your life at your most valuable moments. From the age of 13 to 18, I had no accessible bathroom in the foster home I lived in. Every Monday, I would be taken to the public shower at the swimming pool. I had no privacy or dignity.
And that alone, when I sort of absorbed that, hang on a minute, from age 13 to 18, you did not have an accessible bathroom in your foster care. So that takes a little bit to kind of absorb. And that your only opportunity to bathe was when someone took you to a public shower. And by the way, to all of our panelists for sharing these intimate stories, thank you, because it's deep and intense. And it's amazing that you're telling the world because these things can't happen anymore, right? We got to make changes. So if we go to the next image, and now this is where our panelists said, so brace yourselves a tiny bit. And again, this is Peter Park, who has really, again, taught me, guided me, and who really encourages always having images. So we've worked on some publications together, And Peter said, you know what, rather than just writing words, we need pictures, because we need this to be accessible for people who don't read. So Marissa and I worked on an article together for the Journal of Developmental Disabilities. And in that, Marissa called this image Trapped. So Marissa and I worked on this image together. She directed exactly what she wanted to be in this image to show how she felt, right, Marissa? So when you were in foster care, do you want to talk a little tiny bit about this isolation, the jail cell image, why you wanted there to be a jail cell image?
Yes. So in my old foster home, I was in a transport chair that I had no seatbelt. I was falling out of my chair, and it wasn't safe.
So, and as you can see, so this is, Marissa very clearly directed this. She said no, you wanted no windows,
Right.
no connection with the outside world, so really locked in this isolated concrete image. And I remember you said, and I put me in pajamas because I want to be in clothes that I didn't choose, that don't fit me properly, that are easy for the staff to put on me, that I have no connection to. And so it's a painful image. But thank you, because Marissa this will be published in the Journal of Developmental Disabilities. So, and Marissa is an author in that article, which will be wonderful to get your word out there and trying to make change. So thank you so much, Marissa, for sharing. Even again, the questions at the end will come to. Our next panelist is Peter Park. As you can see, we're moving from the next generation, and now we're going to our generation that's guided us, right? So Peter, do you want to talk about your gut reaction?
My gut reaction. Well, my gut reaction has changed since I wrote this other thing when I saw it tonight. I'm a firm believer that everyone can live in their own home given proper support. And I picked that out. That's something I definitely believe in, because a friend of mine, very close friend actually, he's got 24-hour support, doesn't hear, doesn't talk, blah, 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 but he lives in the same building, lives very independently. Needless to say, as I said, I'm very much against institutions, and my gut reaction when I saw that was, they're still talking about this and that. I thought, so we were through talking about that. I'm afraid we're going to be talking about that long after I've died.
Well, you've made an incredible impact for 40 years. I think you've been incredibly tireless. You have worked nonstop. Peter's traveled around the world doing work, and you can't stop him. I mean, he was just the keynote speaker last month or 2 months ago at the Ontario Association for Developmental Disabilities on inclusive research practices on people with disabilities, authoring their own stories, not other researchers talking about them. So Peter's unstoppable, and Mika, you're gonna have to, Mika and Marissa are gonna have to keep up. You got a long way to go, but it's good.
I just started.
Did you say I just started? And Peter, and again, here comes another image that is slightly jarring. This one, Peter directed, and this is another article that was published in the Canadian Journal of Disability Studies last year. And Peter, again, was talking about his institutionalization, you call it incarceration. Do you want to say some words about this image?
This is D ward, or detention. Now, I said I was in the institution for 18 years. Well, I figure I was in half of them locked up in D ward, detention. The walls were bare. You were bare. You went to the washroom at the hole in the floor. So that was, and you were in there not just a day, you were in there until the so-called doctor said, that, okay, you can get out.
And as Peter pointed out, the circle, and again, Peter directed this whole image, basically from your memory, right? Because Peter said, you know what, there aren't pictures of the abuse that people went through in the institution that need to be out there. And that the little hole or the little square in the door, right, that is where the staff would look through. So Peter said they didn't give him a place to go to the bathroom.
If you moved from the center of the floor to one of the corners, it was more comfortable or warmer or something, the staff would open the door and come in and say, either you get the hell back to there near the center of the floor, or else you're gonna stay in here longer.
And
Well.
they would extend your time. And Peter, I found this so amazing. As you can see, everyone on the panel is pretty brilliant. Peter, when he was in the institution, had 2 books. Do you want to share a little bit about the books that you had?
Well, my father was a pharmacist, and he gave me these 2 books, the Canadian CPS and the Canadian Pharmaceutical Services Compendium or something, and Merck Manual. And they would tell the side effects of every pill in there. And if some of the pills that they were trying to give you weren't in there, I would refuse to take them. A lot of the times you were given the medication that nobody could buy at Shoppers Drug Mart or anywhere else. They were being used as human guinea pigs, and you knew it. But if they weren't in there, I'd hand the pills back, and they'd say, "Okay, you're going over to D ward."
So he would get thrown into this isolation concrete
So,
ward, and just for not taking medication, because he knew that he was a guinea pig, and that these, as Peter would look it up in the CPS compendium, it's like, wait a minute, this isn't a known drug. What are the side effects? And you knew you were a guinea pig and
Yeah.
didn't want to be taking it. And thank you for sharing all of your
and
stories.
sure, I happened to be epileptic, and they were giving me the epileptic drugs that they knew at the time, phenobarb and dilantin. Well, now that I got out, they found that I'm allergic to both phenobarb and dilantin. So they likely were causing the seizures, not calming me down.
And Peter said something else that I thought was really hit home deeply, and that is, he said, you know something about being incarcerated in an institution? He said, I think it's worse than being in jail, because when you're in jail, do you remember what you said,
No,
Peter?
when you're getting out, they're, well, you never knew. I knew at 12 o'clock that I was getting out. 12 o'clock, I was getting out at 1 o'clock. 1 hour to say goodbye to anybody and eat. Are you crazy?
Right, when they finally, after 18 years, when they finally
After
said, you're getting
18
out,
years.
it's like, okay, you got an hour, you're getting out.
Yeah.
So where's the preparation? And I always said, I always get it wrong, but I said it was the day after he got out of the institution that Peter co-founded People First of Ontario, but I think you say it was a month or so. It was the same year anyway, right?
Not the same day, no.
Yeah. But you got right to it. You got right to it. The amazing, amazing action. Well, thank you for sharing that. And now I think we have another slide, right, so there we are, straight to Rob. And
Oh no, it's that picture.
We are so lucky to have Rob joining us, being shoulder to shoulder with activists, people bringing their voices, and one of the most powerful lawyers in disability law. I know Rob's too modest. He's looking at me like, Sue, what are you saying? But Rob, please tell us about how you felt about watching it. And
Sure, and I'd like to say a little bit about Arch as well. Perhaps that may help with the context. I think I certainly share, and we've had some really interesting discussions about the film. It was so powerful. I'm sure all of you were moved in some way. I think for me, there were a lot of different emotions, and there were so many themes that came out of the movie. But the one persistent thought was how similar those stories are to the ones that we experience, the ones that we learn about, the ones that we keep on experiencing through all different aspects of our lives and our work as advocates. And that, I think, is just, I guess that says a lot, but certainly we need to remember the dark legacy that this country has. The institutionalization, the eugenics movement, sterilization. Heard some, there was a line there that referred to neglect, abuse, and murder. I mean, certainly we're not immune to that either. So we need to understand that, and we need to learn from that. But certainly barriers persist, ableism persists. There's still, we've closed institutions here in Ontario, but we hear from many people that live in conditions that are still somewhat similar. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. I sort of remember something that Peter told me maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, when Peter was fighting for deinstitutionalization. And you may or may not remember this, Peter, but it always stuck with me. And it was something that you said, Peter. It was real change comes really slow. And that's so true. And it seems like, we watch this in an hour and a half, an hour and a half or whatever it is, but it takes so long, to get real change, and so many powerful stories are part of that and contribute to that. And so just to sort of sum it up, there was something said in the first minute or two of the movie, and I caught it and it stuck with me. It was disability power. And to me, we could certainly take a lot of negative things out of this movie in terms of the history, but the disability power, it's such a powerful concept. Really what we saw, what the film talked about, was incredible people, incredible stories, and the power that we all have to make change. So I thought it was an incredibly moving film. If I can take a minute about ARCH, because there is an interesting connection between ARCH and the disability rights movement here in Ontario. So ARCH is a community-based legal organization. We're based here in Toronto, but we have a provincial mandate. And we advance the equality rights of persons with disabilities. So how we do that is through a number of different ways. Generally, we try to take on big cases to change the law, or we try to change law in other ways. And we also do, we try to change policy, and we try to give free legal advice to persons with disabilities across the province. And our bylaws state that our board of directors need to be a majority of persons with disabilities. So we were incorporated in 1979, and that was in the middle of the Ontario disability rights movement. And what the rights movement was how the movement was developing and what they were going through, they realized that they needed to start developing some legal expertise. And they wanted to ensure that the movement was backed with a place that people can go to bring forward important test cases to start challenging the law. And so in 1979, ARCH was incorporated, and we opened our doors in 1980 in January. And one of the first things that ARCH did was work with the disability groups and persons with disabilities throughout Ontario to try to get, and successfully in the end, disability as a protected ground in the Human Rights Code. So I think that was one of those huge victories for the movement here in Ontario to get disability protected in the code, and around the same time, disability was also part of the charter that was then enacted here in Canada. So just a little bit of a history, but certainly the connections are so similar to the film that we just saw.
So that's a little tiny bit about Rob. Any questions? Well, yes. Sure. Can you hold the questions till the Q&A? Because I think we're getting there very soon. very soon. So one more piece. Do you want to say a couple words about this very important?
Sure, you can
Yep.
stop me if I go on. So the worst thing you can do is give a lawyer a microphone, and it's just terrible. So the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is a convention that Canada has ratified in 2010. And we heard in the film the catch cry, "Nothing about us without us." And I think the convention was effectively drafted with that catch cry. It really became a guiding principle. Persons with disabilities were key to getting the convention, and the convention touches on all different aspects of life in the community, from supported decision making to inclusive education to independent living. So that is a graphic representation of the convention. It's not the treaty itself, although it would be fantastic if that was actually the treaty. It would certainly be more accessible than it is right now. But it's just a wonderful graphic depiction of all the different rights that are caught in the treaty. And we heard a lot about the social model in the film, and Arch's work is primarily social model and rights model based, but the convention as well really does adopt a social model approach to all the rights that it enhances. Yeah, sorry, and that's it.
That's great, but it is really important to touch on that. And I think if we go to our next slide, and then perhaps one more slide after this. There we go. So just, I want you to take note, if you have cell phones, feel free to take a quick picture of that. This is the Arch Alert, so if you want to keep in contact, great way to get involved in disability discussions and knowing what's going on with Arch. But we'll come back to this. And we have another slide just with some contact, just to carry the conversation on. But I love that Rob kind of closed off with talking about social model, and I think it's really important. When I told my son, he was 10 years old, Kai, that I was going to be doing this panel that I was moderating, and he said, "But Mom, why are you moderating? You don't have a disability. You shouldn't be the moderator." And I thought, you amazing kid, I love you. So I think it's such a good point. And it sort of brings us to this allyship, but the importance of, and in the film they talked about everyone's involved. We're all involved in this. It's extremely critical, and Mika didn't mention it in her talk, but she was saying, when we talked earlier, that when you were a kid, that you saw people with disabilities as children, but you didn't see role models.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which I think is so important, and that's why I look out for these guys. But just reminding everyone in this room has a role to play in this, right? We all are touched by this, and we all will be touched by this and continue to be. So there's something we all can do. So we want to talk about getting into the conversation and how can we all kind of be engaged. But I think we'll open it up at this point to the floor, and we would love to have questions, questions and comments. I think Liv is going to jump in here.
I'm just letting you know, Sue, and everyone, that to avoid the feedback from the mics, we're going to use this mic for the audience, and you two can share that mic. We just don't want you to have to experience that feedback. And Effie is going to run the mics for us. So if you have a question, let us know.
Great. So we have a few. So why don't we start over here? Okay. Great. Sorry about that.
Hey, you want to go first?
That's okay. Go.
Because I actually have two questions. One for like the entire panel, and one just for you, Rob. Who wants to go first? I'll ask my big one first. Yeah. So, what would you guys say is the biggest challenge, or at least are the biggest challenges that you're facing currently in disability rights?
What's the biggest challenge that you're facing in disability rights?
Yeah. So before, you had all these, you had the legislation, right, the ADA, and you had there was independent living, which I know Peter is being like, what? We're still talking about this? Why isn't this resolved yet? But I'm saying, yeah, for now and for the future, kind of what are we looking towards?
So it's a big question. I'm going to throw it out. Is anybody hot to answer this one? What's the biggest challenge in disability? So it's a pretty open-ended question.
Pretty
right?
open-ended. What's your opinion?
Yeah, on what the biggest challenge. Anybody want to jump in?
Especially like Mika as a young person, or yeah.
Okay, so I think Marissa put her hand up there, and Mika, you might want to after, and I think everybody wants to jump in, so why
Yeah,
don't
great
and then we'll
question.
get to a couple other questions. Yeah, so like, just briefly, what's your response? What would you say?
I think trying to have people listen to the individual and say, like, no, I'm in control, instead of the person that's with us and trying to take over the conversation. So that's my biggest thing.
Excellent. Yeah. Did everybody hear that okay? Yeah. Great.
I definitely agree with Marissa, and also it may seem really basic, but I would love to just exist in a society where I can go a whole day without someone stopping to stare at me or question me about what my diagnosis is, or something along those lines, or just, you know, I'll just get approached and be like, do you need help? It's like, no, I'm sitting here reading a book, I'm fine, thank you. And so just that just understanding of more people, everybody would be ideal, just understand that I'm okay, and, you know, if I need help, I will advocate, and also that even though I may walk different, I like, you don't automatically have the right to just get an answer or an explanation. I know, it's interesting, but like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, your privacy is being invaded, like your public domain.
Yep.
Yeah, you get a lot of, you know, what happened to your legs?
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, what's wrong with your legs?
Yes.
Or are you okay?
Yeah.
Or a lot of, yeah.
Well, the way I would answer that is, okay, here's me, I'm a person, I know what's best for me. Somebody else, they're only assuming that they know what's best for me. And as far as I'm concerned, I have to tell them where to go if they try and tell me different. But to recognize me as an individual, as a person, not a, okay, so I happen to have a disability. They can't catch that. I know many people have said, can I, if I shake your hand, can I catch your epilepsy? No.
Right.
Rob, did you want to jump in?
Sure. So from a legal perspective, there are a couple of things coming up. As some of you may know, the federal government announced that they will be releasing a draft bill of the federal accessibility legislation. So we don't yet know what that legislation will be, but I imagine there will be a lot of work for disability communities. And you know, as someone in the film said, you know, getting the law is step one, and then actually making it work is so much harder. So there is going to be a lot of work. The convention that we talked about earlier, you know, that also is such an important piece of work, but it's certainly not law right now in Canada and Ontario. Even though Canada has ratified it, we still have a lot of work to do to change our laws to be in line with the convention, for example, on issues around education or supported decision making. So there are a lot of those things that need to be done. And then, of course, we look at, you know, the low employment rates or high unemployment rates. Our education system is really not you know, it's such an old, archaic legislation that dictates how children with disabilities get education services. I can go on and on. There's certainly a lot of work that still needs to be done.
Yeah, that answers my question. It's kind of like what next?
Right.
What next needs to be done? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. And maybe we can pass the mic, because I think you had your hand up.
I didn't, but I just wanted, honestly, like just for you, I just wanted to know, you mentioned that you would be challenging laws in court, but then you're also working on changing the law without a case, or also, sorry, not like without a lawsuit, and also changing policy. So how does Arch do that? How does Arch change policy without a class action lawsuit or influence policy?
Right. Yeah. Very good question. So the way we approach our work is in a more kind of holistic way. So when we identify an issue, we don't just automatically say that that would be a great case and let's find a case, or if a case comes in, we really try to figure out how to address or how to make the change that we want to make, and we look at all the tools that we have. So sometimes litigation is the right way to go, and sometimes it's not actually. And sometimes law reform, like writing submissions and getting a coalition of organizations and trying to increase education in the community and educate the judiciary, like those kind of things may actually be sometimes more effective than bringing a case forward. So it really depends on what issue or what barrier we're trying to remove.
And you can change law like that.
We have, I mean, sometimes, we can be, it's hard to say what's more successful, it really, depends, but there have been examples where litigation hasn't worked or it's settled, and we've been able to put pressure on government through other ways and then get some kind of amendment to a law, for example, regulation.
I guess what are those ways? Like, what are the
persistence. I mean, there are. So I'll give you an example. There was a provision in the Education Act and regulation that allowed for principals basically to exclude children with disabilities. But the regulation itself was never meant that way. It was supposed to be meant for adults who didn't belong in the school. But it was part of the Safe Schools Act, which happened in 2000 or 2001, and so within a year or two, we started noticing this trend of principals removing students with disabilities, and they weren't allowed to come back to school. There was no appeal, and there was nothing. And we had tried many different ways. We met with the Minister of Education. We tried to take on cases. We had a group of families. We did all those things, but in the end, what worked, the amendment to that regulation, was making a submission to the standing committee and making a written and oral submission. But I think what really worked was about 5 years of concentrated effort through getting disability groups to raise the issue, getting our community partners to raise the issue, making it an issue. So different strategies around, at Arch, we've launched some campaigns, some successful, some not. Certainly, again, depending on the issue, we try to tailor our approach to what we're trying to get to. Hope that answered.
I have a feeling you have a lot more good
I'm
questions.
good.
Is Access Awareness next Tuesday?
It is. Next Tuesday.
So come ask us, because you can get into more conversations with all the lawyers at Arch, who are all pretty kick-ass. But next Tuesday, put in your minds, there is a big Arch event open to the public.
At the Law Society, that's right.
At the Law Society. So we'll fill you in on that. If you want to go to another thing and learn more about the law, next Tuesday we can tell you about it. But I think we have a couple more questions we want to get to.
Well, first, I wanted to say that my reaction to the film was jealousy, because I wished I could have been there to be in those demonstrations. That would have been great. And the other thing, you can't stay because you might hear I'm starting to choke, and that's a seizure disorder, and I don't want to have a seizure here. I'm really annoying. But one thing that bugs me the most with being disabled is the people who, total strangers, come up to me and say, "Oh my God, you poor thing, what happened to you?" And my standard response is, "Nothing, what happened to you?" So feel free to use that one the next time somebody asks you something so personal and none of their business, and I say, "Not a thing happened to me. I'm perfectly fine. I was born this way." And in fact, I wasn't really, but I was born with a lot of the crap that I live with, so. But it's nobody's business how I got this way. Maybe I was having weird kinky sex and fell off a roof or something.
Yeah.
That's nobody's business. Anyway, my comments today.
Thank you so much.
We have to go.
Thank you for your comments. Amazing. And I have a feeling you're not the only one who wishes that you were at those demonstrations, right? But come get it. Are you involved with Arch?
I'm on that list.
Okay, good. So.
Asking me to be on the board, but I haven't done it yet.
Okay.
I will.
Well, then we'll have to see. I have a feeling we'll be seeing you around. Thank you so much. And I think another question. Yep.
I'm just curious. I tried to draw on the struggle of the LGBTQ community and draw a parallel to the struggle of people with disabilities. On the one hand, we have homosexuality, which was criminal activity in Canada. Then we have the civil rights movement in the States, and we moved forward with legislation. One might say that we have exemplary legislation here in Canada. But what I hear and what I experience on a daily basis is this day-to-day struggle with what this woman before me just described. You know, a lot of ignorance, a lot of time and time again, people who make you feel like you want to bat at a quote-unquote institution. You don't want to deal with these people. So going back to my question, I'm going on a tangent here. We had the charter in place, and somehow homosexuality turned out to be very sexy. Today, everybody wants to know someone who's gay and lesbian. You know, we have sitcoms with gay and lesbians. Employment rates are great. How would you describe why, strategically or otherwise, what happened to people with disability in terms of moving forward compared to people with gay and lesbian, the LGBTQ?
I see, right. Are you sort of saying that there's different struggles, different movements maybe have more push, or suddenly the LGBTQ community is like, hey, look, it's television, there's more prominence, more traction, right, in that movement? Is that what you're saying? And why is the disability movement not moving forward in the same way? Is that what you're asking?
Well, have you ever noticed that people...
Sorry, I think he's just going to continue.
I guess the question is, you know, I see one movement being quite successful in not only having the legislation work for it, but actually being accepted in the community and as part of the community. Whereas with the disability movement, we can't seem to move to that place. And I just wonder, I don't want to overly legalize it so that we talk about the legal framework, because I think the legal framework is essentially the same. Homosexuality has been treated as a disability for the purpose of Section 15, and you know, but we have one type of disability really that became quite accepted, and another type of disability, a physical disability or a mental disability, that is quite unacceptable still today in Ontario, in Canada, despite of all the wonderful legislation that we have in place.
There's a cross-disability organization that is able to do the legal stuff that Rob spoke about, conquer that legal stuff, and there's people like myself that aren't willing to tackle that sort of thing, and we're stuck behind the 8 ball, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, thank you. And somebody just pointed out to me to make sure that when I'm speaking to the mic so that people streaming at home can hear. But thank you for your question. I think Mika wants to jump in and also respond.
So I just want to take a minute to acknowledge in response to your question that there is obviously in some scenarios the LGBTQ plus movement and the disability rights movement are entirely separate. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's a great deal of intersectionality in many, many ways in the disability rights movement and the LGBTQ plus movement. So when we're talking about the LGBTQ plus movement and the disability rights movement, the reality is that they are not mutually exclusive, and a lot of what affects either one can affect both at the same time, because there are many people who identify as LGBTQ plus that also are living with disabilities. So to say that one has overtaken the other in terms of acceptance, that may be true in sort of a broad sense, certainly. I do want to acknowledge that, but it's just, there's a complexity to it that I think it's important to engage with.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mika. Does anybody else want to jump in on that? I think Mika, speaking to the intersectionality of these pieces is so super critical, right? Because there's so many others. Are we pointing to a question over here? I think, yeah, okay. Great. So I'm getting your time is coming to a rapid close. Did anybody have any closing? So we had one more. So does anybody on the panel want to jump in with a closing statement that anybody would like to say, 1 or 2 words? I can pass the microphone along if everybody wants to say 1 or 2, or no? Anybody want to jump in? And then we'll come to the question. Very good. Okay. Oh, fantastic. Very good. We have time for, okay, great. We have time. We would love, please honor your question. Please come on in. Yep.
My question is that in the movie they talked about institutions being closed and the fact that a lot of our institutions in Ontario have been closed, the big ones. Can you tell me how you feel, or whether or not you think that still we do have small little institutions around where they are still in control of what is going on, rather than the people who are living in them having free rights to say and do what they want?
Well, I'd love to do a quick response to that, and then do other people want to jump in? One of my takes, and again, so I told you about my early days as being a social worker and providing support for people who had been institutionalized, who are now in the community. But over the years, I've seen that I think a lot of the struggles are probably different, and Peter, it'd be great to hear you speak and articulate this. But I mean, we've shared this conversation that now there's still rights violations left, right, and center that we need to address that are serious. So now it's almost as though before in the institutions, you could lift the roof and say, wow, look in that one big building, all of that stuff's going on in there. But now it's all in pockets, it's all in corners, it's all in these little places hidden in the community. So I think that we have to work even harder to get to those places, to find out what else do we need to do to make change, because I think it's probably pretty bad still in a lot of places, and we have a long way to go. And that's why it's so great we've got young people like Mika and Marissa jumping in here. Does anybody want to speak to that? I think it's a really important question to close with, and just kind of reminding us of how much work we need to do. Does anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah. Trying to formulate my thinking. Well, I know that the people are being moved, shuffled into group homes and other places that aren't appropriate, like long-term care. And in my way of thinking, they're being shuffled from one institution to another. And needless to say, I'm against institutions, period. After being in one, I don't believe anyone should live in an institution, because you don't live, you only exist. It was the worst years of my life. I know they're supposed to be the best when you're 20 to 38, but those were the worst years of my life. That's when most people get married, go to college, blah, blah, blah. I didn't have those opportunities.
And I 2 quick things I want to say. Number one, Peter said this over and over again, institution is a state of mind, right? Institution is a state of mind. So it's not necessarily bricks and mortar. But Peter, you talk about the institution you're living in now.
Yeah, the institution that I'm living in now, the institution of marriage.
And I think Mika has one more closing statement.
Just really quickly, I wanted to also just talk about how I think that the idea of an institution as a medical facility where people are locked in, that's absolutely still prevalent, but also the institutions where that you can find those examples of people with disabilities being controlled. You can find them in schools, in hospitals, in rehabilitation centers, and it's the reality for a lot of people from childhood to into adulthood. And I think one of the only differences is that you might go home at the end of the day, but you still lack control, and your voice can still be taken depending on where you are in the school system and where you recover from any procedures you might have as a person with a disability.
Yeah. Thank you. I know we're probably going to be evicted soon, but will you approach us with your question? Because I know you still had one. I think that we're probably right. Yeah, I'm getting that. So I think we need to get going, but please come on up and ask us your questions. If we could end off on the slide, can we still advance just so that we can continue the conversation? So as you know, get in touch with Arch there. Do we still have the ability to advance slides? Because we have one, the next slide, if we're able to do that, just to leave you with a couple places to get in contact. Respecting Rights through Arch, we have a Facebook page. Community Living Toronto has a Facebook page. People First of Ontario has pages you can connect with.
People First of Canada.
People First of Canada. So
Inclusion International.
yes, so we do have that on the slide. But thank you so much. I think we're getting ready. Now Victor is going to come up and say a couple of comments. Thank you, Victor.
Well, first of all, thank you, Sue. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to read from notes. Sue told me to wing it, but I told her I wasn't going to try that. On behalf of the Board of Community Living Toronto, I'd like to thank all of you, the audience, for coming out and supporting the film, supporting the festival, and supporting our theme of Rise and Triumph of the disability rights movement. Today's topic, focusing on disability rights, is at the heart of what we do at Community Living Toronto. Our revamped mission statement is to foster inclusive communities by supporting the rights and choices of people with an intellectual disability. And our vision is that we live in a society where everyone belongs and where everyone is valued. After tonight, I'm grateful for the work that so many of you do personally and professionally to fight for these rights. Again, thanks, Sue, for all your remarks, as well as for guiding the conversation. I know monitoring and winging it is not an easy role to play, so sincerely, thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists. We're a fantastic group of people. You've each brought your own unique perspective, and your stories are remarkable. I understand that something as simple as finding an accessible restaurant, as Sue was telling me earlier, for you to go to prior to this film was a challenge in 2008. So just a shout out to the Museum Tavern on Bloor Street, who are accessible. I think you mentioned that earlier as well. To each panelist, please keep fighting for yourself and for others.
Excuse me. Sorry, we can't pick up here. Guy.
Pick up for someone.
Will Trans pick up?
That's me.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I promise you, panelists, after tonight, there are more warriors in this room that'll take up the fight for you, I'm sure. We know that sharing your stories and experiences is very personal, and I know that you all have put a lot of time into preparing for tonight, and it shows as you speak. Thank you. And to show our appreciation, we have a token, a small gift for you, to just say thank you. Also want to thank the Miles Nadell Jewish Community Center and the whole crew behind the organization of the Real Abilities Film Festival, especially Liv Mendelson and Julia Rocky Where'd she go to? Oh. And this festival has grown so much, and Community Living is thrilled to be a sponsor and a supporter for 3 years running. Thank you both. Thank you all our volunteers tonight. Jason, where he is over in the corner there, and he's our recording, filming the event, and Lewis Thomas, our photographer. And thank you to the great public relations, marketing, and fundraising team at Community Living Toronto, who are always behind the scenes making great things happen. After tonight, we do hope that the conversation will continue. Sorry, I'm almost done. This topic, as we all know, is too important not to talk about, and we hope it has changed many minds and opened some hearts in this room. We've covered the event on Facebook Live, and as Sue said, we're across many social platforms using the social tag, hashtag, Rise and Triumph, along with others in your program. We've also posted some resources on the Community Living Toronto website, on the page Rise and Triumph. Please use and share these resources. If you have other information, please send it along. The more information and tools we can make available, the better. We look forward to getting social with all of you on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Come and find us there. And once again, on behalf of Community Living Toronto, thank you all, and have a good night.
Thank you.